Hello everyone, Rahul here presenting before you the next chapter of the economic survey, and the name of the chapter is services sector. So let's move ahead. So what is services sector? Now services sector consists of the soft parts of the economy. Now what do you mean by these soft parts? It is the activities where people offer their knowledge and time to improve productivity, performance, potential, sustainability, etc. etc. And hence it is often termed as effective labor. I will just tell you what you mean by that. Effective labor. So, those who provide time and knowledge, they provide you effective labor. Fine. So, the basic characteristics of this sector is production of services instead of end products. That is, what we get is intangible goods. That is, we are not getting some product which we can touch or feel. What we are getting is service. For example, attention, advice, assess, experience and discussion. Fine. So the production of information is generally also regarded as a service, but sometimes it is not included in the tertiary sector. Now services sector is also called tertiary sector, but sometimes the information production is not included in services sector or tertiary sector. It is included in quaternary sector. Fine. As you all know that economy has been divided into three sectors, and this quaternary sector has been a recent addition. Fine. So activities in the service sector, there are many different kind of activities in the service sector. For example, retail, banks, hotels, real estate, education, health. You see, in retail you get products, but the person who is providing your product is getting from somewhere else. So this is kind of service. Because your shop owner is providing you service, he is charging some more amount than the actual amount. So that is called the profit. Banks, you open your accounts in the banks, you save the money in the banks, they charge interest, they charge little bit money, service charges, etc. So hotels, you book a hotel, you stay for a day, you pay money. So this is also service. And real estate, the builder builds houses, gives you flats, you pay money. So this is also service provided by the builder. Fine. So there are various kind of services. Entertainment is also service, tourism is also service. Fine. So let's move ahead. Now services sector is the most dynamic sector of the world's economic. It contributes almost 1/3 of the gross value added and almost half of the world's employment, 1/5 of the global trade, and more than half of the world's foreign investment flows, like FDI, that is invested in various companies. Fine. So this is very important. If somebody asks you a question on services or it comes in essay, you can use these points. They can come in very handy and gives examiner a very good impression of you. Fine. So the key driver of India's economic growth has been services, because it has contributed 66.1% of its gross value added growth in 2015-16. Also, it is important net foreign exchange earner. You might be knowing that IT services is mostly exported to UK and USA as well as Germany. Now it is also most attractive sector for FDI inflows. Okay, but of late the global slowdown has put a problem for this promising sector. Like the demand has reduced, which has led to decrease in the total output provided by this sector. So let's move on to the next slide. Now you should know, do you know about the GVA? Actually, GVA is the productivity metric or the product that is being formed minus the raw materials which have been consumed. The value which comes after subtracting the value of the raw materials is gross value added. The name only tells gross value added. Value is to be noted here. So, comparing India to the other international economies in terms of services. Now, among the world's top 15 countries in terms of GDP, US is number 1 in both services GVA, gross value added, and overall GDP, and China is in second place and Japan is in third place. Fine. Now, India is ranked 9th in terms of overall GDP and 10th in terms of GVA, and it has climbed one place. However, in these 15 nations, the maximum increase in the services share to GVA was recorded by Spain. Now, you should note in the 13 years from 2001 to 13, Spain services have risen very fast, and second number is India's services and third number is China's services. So the problem was why other economies slow down is that global slowdown affected the services sector a lot, so they were not able to fully recover, and hence there was a general slowdown in the services rate of growth for the world and across nations, but except Brazil in the post-crisis. Why Brazil is not affected by the global financial crisis? It was not affected because it had very high growth rate in wholesale and retail trade and also in restaurants and hotels category. Fine. So let's move ahead. Now coming to the compound annual growth rate. Now compound annual growth rate of world services after 2008 financial crisis have decreased by 0.5% to 2.5%. Previously, that is before the global financial crisis, the services were growing at the rate of 3%. Suppose services value is 100 billion. Fine. It was growing at 3% per year. If you suppose 3% per year means 103 billion in the next year, $103 billion, and again now add 103 billion plus 10% of 103 billion. This will come after the second year, but later after the global financial crisis it decreased by 0.5%. So despite this slowdown, India's services sector has been the fastest with the compound annual growth rate of 8.6%, which was more than China by 0.2%. Fine. Now in 2014, if we see India's service sector growth at 10.3%, which is 2.3% more than the China's. Fine. So let's move ahead. Coming to the word services employment. Now services have contributed to the increase in the global employment by 15 percentage points. Now what we mean by this is that services now contribute to approximately half of the total jobs generated in the economy. World's economy I am talking about. Among the world's top 15 services producer countries, share of services in employment is very high. That is 2/3. If you see in 2014, it contributed 2/3 of total employment. Overall, it is 50%, but now it contributed 2/3. But services failed to generate employment in India and China, and India's case is worse than China. India has the lowest share of 28.7% of total employment generated in India. And of the 15 countries in the last 13 years, between 2001 and 14, China has the highest increase in the share of services and employment. Now, this is very important. China has been able to increase employment in the services sector. That is by huge margin. Increase. You should not increase, not in absolute terms. And then followed by Brazil, then Spain, and then India. India has been able to increase the employment by very meager percentage point, that is only 4.7 percentage point. Suppose previously we had 1000 jobs generated in the services, now we have 1047 only. But China has generated 1343. That is the difference. So we need to work how to improve the job generation in these services. And also, according to the Global Employment and Social Outlook Trends 2015 report of International Labour Organizations, job creation in coming years will be mostly in the services sector. And you all know that India has almost jumped from the agricultural sector or the primary sector to the tertiary sector with very low capacity generation or capacity building in secondary sector or capital building in secondary sector. So let's move ahead. Now coming to the words services trade. Now the impact of global financial crisis was more pronounced in the services trade than the services gross value added. With this compound annual growth rate of world commercial services exports during the post-crisis period have decreased to 6.4% compared to 15% during the pre-crisis period. What I mean by that? That previously there was services export of 15%, but now after the 2008 global financial crisis, it has decreased to 6.4%. So the global financial crisis have affected the services trade. Coming to the next point. Now before, India and China were leading in services, but after the global financial crisis, Mexico has been leading the China and China has been leading India. So the Mexico has come out of nowhere to lead in the pack of services exports. Now the largest exporter of commercial services has been USA undisputably. Also, the services export have been less in 2014 than 2013. For USA, it fell in 2014. Japan, UK, China and India rose because of base effect. In 2013, these countries had low services trade. But this time we had the inflated figures because of base effect. That is, last time if you have low growth, this time you're bound to have higher growth because the base, the comparison or the you can say the core you take is very low than the normal. Now let's go to the next slide. Now as per the World's Trade Organization data for 2015, service trade growth has been in negative territory for the most quarters, because economic survey is only mentioning about the 3 quarters, because it is published in Feb 28 on or released on Feb 28, so it mostly covers till 3 quarters of the year 2015-16. So the situation has been very bad. Most of the quarters have been negative for various economies. The situation, the merchandise trade figures have shown a steeper fall than even services. So services से ज़्यादा बुरा हाल तो merchandise का है. Now if we see this graph, what do we see? See here. Till 2007-8, there was a rosy picture of services as well as the merchandise. But as we reach here, here comes the time of global financial crisis. There is steep decline in services as well as the merchandise. And now, if you see 2014, it was just in the just about to get in the negative territory. After 2014, quarter 1 2015, it goes into the negative territory, and 2 it is stabilized, and third quarter it again went into the more negative territory. Now world merchandise trade and India's merchandise trade, see here, it is in negative territory, but in services it is little bit better but not very good, you can say. India's services have in general grown much better than the world services trade. Fine, because it is approximately at zero, not negative, not positive. See here. Okay, so let's move ahead. Now, foreign direct investment in the world services sector. Now, global foreign direct investment have jumped by 36% in 2015. So this data has been provided by UNCTAD, that is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. So the trade in the services or FDI in the services has been of the order of US dollar 1.7 trillion, which is the highest since the global economic crisis happened in 2008. However, the growth was largely due to the mergers and acquisitions which are cross border. That's why it is called FDI na. So there was not much of a greenfield or investment, new investment you can say, for the services, but just merging of two companies to make a bigger company, or splitting of a company, or acquiring of a small company by a big company. So these kind of things happened, and that's why there was hike in the FDI, and there was also readjustment of the accounts, corporate accounts. So there was little movement in actual resources, just but it were only on books. It was only on books. Now, as per the World's Investment Report, the shift towards services FDI has continued over the past 10 years in response to increased liberalization. Due to increased liberalization, services have been booming. Also, increasing tradability of services. Now we can price the services and sell the services. Also, the growth of global value chains in which the services play an important role. The linkages have been established. Now, India's service sector have mainly these services: trade, repair, hotels and restaurants, transport, storage, communication and services related to broadcasting, financial services, pub ad and defense services, real estate, ownership of dwelling and professional services, as well as construction services. Now, if we compare the services state-wise, services are dominant in 21 states and UTs. Out of the total 33 states and UTs, 21 has services as dominant in the gross state domestic product, and they are more than 40% in almost all states except Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. You should remember that. At least 40% in all states except Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh, and more than half of gross state domestic product in 21 states and UTs. Now, the major services in most of the cases are trade, hotels and restaurants, followed by real estate, ownership of dwellings and business services. Now, if you see the graph, the first graph is of the services growth in various states, and the second graph is of the share of services in the total GSDP of state. In first graph, you can see the growth of services is high in Pondicherry. See here, in Pondicherry, you can see the higher growth of services given by this orange or brownish kind of color. Then the second number is of Meghalaya. If you talk about the services growth, and now if you talk about the share of services, Delhi has the highest share of services, but Chandigarh also has it, but it is UT. If you talk about state, Delhi has the highest share of services. Then at the second number is Kerala, and at the third number is Maharashtra. So see the inferences. Services GSDP, Delhi has the highest, I have just told you, it is 7.5%, followed by Maharashtra at 63.8%, and above Maharashtra there is Kerala. Services growth, if you talk about, Puducherry leads with 16.3% growth in services, followed by Meghalaya 13.2% growth in services, and the growth in Puducherry is due to the increases growth rate of high weight sectors like trade, hotels, restaurants, etc. And in the case of Meghalaya, it is due to other services which is not included in the accounts of services given by the CSO, Central Statistical Office. Now Jammu and Kashmir have the lowest services growth at 2%. This is due to low and negative growth in most of the sectors except PUBED. In PUBED it has positive growth in services, but all the other sectors are in negative growth pattern. So thank you everyone. Please like, comment and subscribe to www.decipherize.com. Please like our Facebook page.